Unless there is like a dramatic crisis, I think the power law will stay.
I definitely want to keep this a unique show. Is there something that you were like, this is something that could break the power law?
Yes, in one end, sure. I can imagine things like, for example, quarter four of this year, it turns out to be 200K. And so this was my projection. It's no feelings. I don't do anything by feelings or by guess. I calculate. It will destroy the power law. There will be no power law at that point. And that event is happening. And I think it's going to happen in 20 years from now.
Dr. Giovanni Santostasi, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Those of you who don't know, just really briefly, Giovanni is a PhD in astrophysics, and he is a passionate Bitcoiner and has 12 years experience in analyzing Bitcoin and creating price models. He is the discoverer of the Bitcoin power law in time. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. We're going to kind of take the angle of people that you already know what the power law is, and we'll kind of touch on it obviously here in general. But if you want to go back and watch, Giovanni obviously has a ton of work, a lot of other airtime explaining what it is. So we'll address a few critiques today that people have around the Bitcoin community. And the one thing that makes the Bitcoin community so amazing, at least in my opinion, is that people come from all different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, and present their ideas here in this arena, which we don't have in the political world. Really, it's really hard. So that's the background that Giovanni comes from already. The science, the scientific community doing this day in and day out. So he loves going back and forth. Fortunately, we have some of the smartest people in this space, like Gio himself. So let's start right there. What can affect the model? Like, what are you curious to see that will affect your model in the future? Either positively or negatively, like black swans. Is there something that you are like, hey, you know what, this is something that could break the power law? Or like, what does your mind go there? Like, what are you looking forward to seeing that could have these black swan type of events, or these results maybe that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, of course, right. I'm thinking about this all the time, every single day. That when I go to sleep, I'm thinking about this, right?
Dreaming about it.
Going to. Right, exactly, right. Not because I am attached to it, right? Because as a scientist, of course, at a certain point, you study something, you care about it, you love it, you want to, you get some. You're not a robot, right? You have also emotions, but and I think it's mostly a question of. I think it's beautiful that Bitcoin is following this regular pattern that you're seeing here, right? But is in one of the reasons that people became scientists, because we see beauty in mathematics, we see beauty in order, So something that is so orderly, organized, follows a very precise pattern, but also is meaningful, right? It's not just like, it's regular and this is it. It's actually, we just discussed it. So there is something deep. I want people to, this idea of scaling is not something completely natural for people. And it's a pity because it's such a fundamental concept. I wish people had a better intuition. It's like a guiding principle. I have this, it's a book about, it's called Scale. It's a book that I always talk with people about it, as a, the best place where to learn about this principle of scaling. It's the author is Jeffrey West. Maybe you can put it in your comments as a reference for people to go deeper. But in this book, I don't have it here usually sitting here. I think it's in a bag. But in the back, there are different, comments about the book, different reviews. And one of them is by Taleb, that is a mathematician that also work with the financial world. He's an option expert. He wrote several books. In fact, he wrote a book called Black Swan. Right? He's actually one of the people that studies this phenomena, that are rare, large phenomena that can change radically a situation. Right? He wrote the book on the topic, he commented on the book Scale, and I usually write quote him. Now he's was a Bitcoiner actually in the beginning, and then he wrote actually this book against not book but an article against Bitcoin. He calls it the black paper. That it's silly. It's actually a terrible paper. And sometimes you can be wrong, and you can be a genius and be wrong. And he's very smart. He's very knowledgeable. But the relevance of his review is he writes it very beautifully. But he basically say that after the basic skills of the citizens all over the world, to be a good citizen, you should learn how to read, how to write, how to talk, and then it says how to scale. You should learn this topic of scaling. And when I read it, I was like, I was smiling because I thought, exactly, this is something that should be taught in schools, like in elementary school, because it's something that if you teach it early on, you're starting to get some kind of intuitive understanding of it. But it's very important because it's all over us, right? So, for example, how human beings grow, how animals grow. There is this beautiful article that I quote all the time where they discover that the growth of tooth, nails, thorns, shells, follow power laws, follow this scaling growth. Um, Cities, for example, the GDP of a city follow a power law, how a city grows. So if people add an intuition, and this is why this book is so beautiful, and I invite everybody to read it. And if you go to my YouTube channel, actually, I have videos where I break down the book and I read sections of the book. I have several videos. I basically am reading the book with the audience, and I'm explaining, and in particular, making correlations with Bitcoin, the relevance of these ideas to Bitcoin. If people understood this idea of scaling, then a lot of the questions that they have, right, about inflation, etc., they will be addressed, right? It's something that unfortunately, people kind of get lost sometimes, and they don't understand what is relevant and what is not relevant, right? That is what is fundamental about this scaling argument. What is fundamental is that Bitcoin has grown 100 millions of times. And so in comparison, nothing changes, right? Even gold, like people that say, oh, gold looks flat in comparison with Bitcoin. If I draw the same chart here, it will look like flat. It will not change much at all. It's basically almost constant in the last 15 years. So they can be used as a point of reference. That is the main idea. So I know it takes time to develop these ideas, but it's something that, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, is there something specifically that you, in terms of black swans, and which I thank you for the book recommendation.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that out. It's really interesting. But in terms of black swans, are there things out there that that you're unsure about with the power law, where it's not unsure about the model per se, but they're unsure about, what's going to happen if this event happens? Are there things out there that you kind of foresee?
Right. Well, in general, I will say that the history of Bitcoin has been a flock of these black swans. There have been a lot of these events, a lot of the history. Like think about Mongox, think about FTX, think about China banning Bitcoin, think about, there have been a lot of events. One event that I'm using all the time as a reference is this dip here. Do you know what that dip is? You see how the price dips very quickly there? That is COVID. Yep. So during COVID, you see the price corrected very strongly. Yeah. And and you see where did it go? It went to that support line, right? Because there is one of the things that people, I don't know if everybody's aware, but we found not just the general trend that goes through the middle of the action of Bitcoin, but actually if you go 60% below that, there is this green line that is what we call the support Bitcoin power law. And it looks like Bitcoin reaches that line, and there are other charts that I can show you that look even better, because this one, like I say, it's kind of you have to push it to get this log behavior on TradingView. But let me show you another chart. I have many indicators. We develop all these indicators to give different type of information about the power law. Okay, so in this case, I'm taking only the log. The calculations are all done like if I was dealing with the log of time and the log of price, but the more natural way of showing things in TradingView is actually just using the log of price, right? In that case, the power law looks a curve like that. It's an artifact of taking the log, because really the linear version, if people wanted to have an intuition of how the power law looks like, it looks like this. It's actually like a parabola, but it's a much faster parabola, right? Parabola means x squared. We are talking about x to the 6. So it's much faster, but it looks like curve up, right? This is how the power law looks like. Now, if I take the log, it will look curve like this, but it's never reaching a ceiling. We always go up, because it does like this, because in a graph like this, if you have an exponential, it will look like a straight line. So anything that is not an exponential, that is slower than an exponential, it looks curved. And this is what Bitcoin is. It's not an exponential, it's a power law, right? So if we zoom in that region where that event happened, that is, and this is why I'm using COVID. COVID was a crazy black swan event for the market. Absolutely was, right? There was an interruption in the supply chain. People stayed at home, represented a disruption, and the market reacted. But notice what happened. It arrived to that support line, and that support line, you see how the support line catches all the different bottoms, right? It catches all the bottoms that we had historically. And there is a reason. It's not a coincidence, because differently from other methods, right, with talk about support, resistance, all these TA methods, this is science. And the science behind this is actually basically physics, the physics of producing Bitcoin. Bitcoin, one of the things that many people forget, differently from many currencies or assets, gold, for example, has that, but it's even gold takes money to be produced, right? You have to extract it, you have to pay people to, and nowadays is more and more difficult, because a lot of mines are exhausted. There are people finding gold at the bottom of the sea, etc. It's very expensive to extract gold. It takes energy, it takes time, it takes money. With Bitcoin, it's even more precise, because you have to use computational power that costs money, and there is the difficulty adjustment. That is the other thing that many people don't realize, that it was programmed where you cannot game the system. If you are trying to get more Bitcoin, then the system is adjusting itself, right? But because there is this mechanism, many Bitcoiners almost seem to ignore that. I don't hear a lot of people talking about a component. It's almost like you're dealing with something that is coded, so a lot of regularities can be explained by that. This regularity of the bottom, it's a consequence of that. Actually, we have done some work, because you mentioned I did a lot of work. I didn't just draw a line and stop there. I'm working 12 hours a day, every single day, on trying to understand Bitcoin, and I have done this for 12 years. I usually write articles about that, some people read or make YouTube videos, etc. But some people went through the rabbit hole and studied all these things. Other people think they understand the power law, but they have a very superficial understanding. If you go deep, that is one of the things that is really relevant with this support line. We showed several times. We need to study it even more. We don't have a definitive proof, but we have a lot of evidence all lined up that shows that the hash rate, if you make a model of Bitcoin where you use hash rate, you get exactly this support level. And that means that is the cost of producing Bitcoin. And so notice what happened during COVID. We arrived there and the market was going crazy, and then it bounced back. It bounced back because, first of all, everybody was exhausted, right? By that time, there was nothing to sell. All the people who wanted to sell sold, right? All the people got scared, and the miners also refused to sell. This is what happened every time we reach the bottom. They reach that point that they don't have necessarily are not necessarily aware of a chart. They are not looking at the chart. Maybe now some do, because they did talk a lot with different mining companies, etc. They are very interesting in this approach. But they know because it's part. If you are a bad mining company, you will get wiped out anyway. You will stop functioning. And the good ones that know, they do calculate how much it costs to produce Bitcoin. And if the price of Bitcoin is smaller than that, they stop selling. And that creates some kind of natural flow for Bitcoin. And the price bounce back. So this is one of events. So there are things like this where almost like a test, right? This was a stress test for the theory that says there is something very powerful in this approach, in this framework, and is the correct way of understanding Bitcoin. That is a scaling system that has these internal feedback loops, because this is how you get power laws. It's all about this understanding that Bitcoin is a network. And so networks are very resistant. So if you read that book Scale, is one of the things that is discussed, that how networks that are associated with power law is almost like, one-to-one, right? Networks show power law properties. Networks are very resistant, very resilient to black swan events. They can change. You can change them, you can modify them, and they react. But then they try to go back. Think about, for example, the human body. The human body, it's a network, because imagine all the different parts of our body, our cells, right? They communicate with each other. A network is basically a system where there are the individual components that we call nodes. In this case, for the human body, it's the cells, right? There are all the different cells that do their own thing. There are their own individual entities. But then they work and communicate with other similar entities. And they have channels of communication that are called the links, right? It can be through, the blood system. It can be through the nervous system. It can be, there are many different pathways where the cell communicate with each other, right? And one of the characteristics, any doctor will tell you, one of the most fundamental characteristics of a living being, of a biological system, is that it likes homeostasis. And homeostasis means basically balance. It means, that the system wants to go back to equilibrium, right? So if I run and my heart starts to pump a lot, then when I rest, when I stop and rest, the heartbeat goes back to balance, right? There is all these values in terms of metabolism, in terms of physiology, that are reference values. And if you push the system because of a illness, because of stress or whatever, the system wants to go back to equilibrium. It doesn't matter if you push it or if you are too low of these values. You also want to go back, right? So this is typical of network. And so, yes, of course, there are things that worry me, and we can mention some of these things. But in general, I have also this intuition, because to me, the power law, it's a guidance. I would like people to start to use the power law as a guidance, as a framework to think about Bitcoin. You should think, when there are difficult events, say, listen, it's a network. It will go back to equilibrium, right? And it's not something that people should take as a religion, because in science there is never such attitude. It's more like a framework. It's more a way of putting Bitcoin in a context and trying to guide you in how to think about every event. So yes, in one end, sure, I can imagine things like, they have to be really drastic. Like, for example, if there is a nuclear war, of course, or situation like that, we will not even have civilization of something like that. But in general, unless there is like a dramatic crisis, I think the power law will stay, because if you work for 15 years, it means there is some kind of a process, right? We need to identify, we need to understand it, because why people want to join the network, what is going on, what are the forces that drive people to join this network, or not just individual people, but also different institutions, right? Small institution, large institution. Now we're talking even about governments and states, right? What drives everybody to want to join this network in such a way that it grows? Because that is the other result, right? We were able to show that the growth in time has to do with the growth in adoption. Because if you look at things like, for example, addresses, that is a good proxy for adoption, is also a power law. And in fact, it's a power law that is related. The reason why we have this growth in time is because addresses also grow as a power law. And the relationship between price and addresses is a power law. Basically, the power law in time is the result of other two power laws. And hash rate is also a power law. There are power laws all over the place in Bitcoin. So why adoption is growing as a power law? Well, probably because the nature of what Bitcoin is, in terms of how it's affecting people ideas about value, like you mentioned before, because it's in the end, the Bitcoin is a story about value, how we value things, right? It's something that people, institution, maybe even nations soon react in this, with this understanding, right? So it's kind of a, for example, there are other phenomena that behave in a very regular fashion. Like, for example, you are aware of Moore's law, right? Moore's law tell us how much computational power we can put in a chip, right? And this seems to double every 2 years. Why there is such a regularity? And you will think it's something to do with how technology evolves, etc. But why technology should evolve in this very regular fashion, where you actually come up with a law, right? This law, people think law means they cannot be broken, and say they are statistical law, right? They work. It's in science, law means a pattern, right? So there are these regular patterns. The Moore's law have been working for more than 50 years, and there are other patterns like that. People studied one of my inspiration in looking for these regularities in Bitcoin is this thinker, and he's like an engineer. His name is Ray Kurzweil. He's very interested in describing the path of technological developments. He even went all the way. He has chart showing that if you look at how technologies have evolved over time, all the way to the invention of a wheel. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of years. It follows a very precise pattern, that you can actually draw on a chart. And so there is something about human nature where when we work together, like, for example, in cities, why cities follow power law. The GDP of a city is a power law in terms of the size of a city. The number of libraries, the number of gas stations, the number of patents that are produced in a city. They follow power law, right? There's something about when humans work together and we build something that is significant, that is valuable to us, and also nature of other phenomena, right? We mentioned different growth phenomena like tooth and thorns and horns and shells. This is a preferred pattern, right? It's something that holds on over a long period of time, that is stable, etc. So it's a mystery, because human beings, you will think a human, one thing is seeing it in nature, and then you say, okay, maybe there is some physiological things that I need to understand, it express itself, etc. With human beings, you always think that we do whatever we want, right? We are free agents. But yes, maybe that is true at the individual level, but as when we work together, there is a coordination of behavior that is shown over time to be basically these power laws when we do certain particular things. And so there is this deep intuition from my side where I think this pattern will continue. Now, there is one single event that will stop, and is also related to the first question, right? Can we use the dollar, or what is the meaning of doing this using the dollar? The meaning is we are telling the story of how we went to a particular place that is that event that will destroy the power law. There will be no power law at that point. And that event is Hyper-Bitcoinization. So the day that there is a nation like the United States that says, you know what, Bitcoin is such a thing that I cannot fight it, I cannot stop it, I cannot compete, let me peg the dollar to Bitcoin. Then the story of this story, these graphs and this entire idea and theory, it's over, because we are going to another chapter of the book, that is basically when everybody is going to use Bitcoin, and so $1 will be some multiple, some fraction of Bitcoin, right? There will be a stable relationship between the two. There is no change anymore, right? Because it's pegged. That is exactly what peg means. And probably at that point, people use all the time this word game theory. I think that is the point where game theory will play, because many nations probably will want to do something similar, that now everybody will use the Bitcoin as a monetary standard. So that is the main event where I think this story ends. And I think it's going to happen in 20 years from now. And there are very precise reasons that I can tell you about. But I'm going to take a break so you can ask me some question or comment on what I say.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant stuff, Gio, and you really brought that together beautifully with, again, like what black swans this, black swans that. At the end of the day, the thing that breaks the power law ultimately is hyper-Bitcoinization, which is what we're all here for at the end of the day. And like you said, I think it's brilliant that this is we don't get religious about it. And you said this many times, just over the course of all your airtime, not just here today, but as a scientist, I mean, it's not getting religious about a framework, because that's what it is. It's a framework. It's a guide. It's not something to just, hey, this is going to be perfect all times every day. And I think that's such a smart thing. I think about Plan B last cycle, and people got so caught up in that, and people, people wrecking themselves or whatever it was, because they were following this religiously and you just said it. I mean, it's a framework. And then you mentioned cities. I would love to ask you this. You mentioned cities, and we talked about the bodies, the systems of the body, and networks of networks. And can you model like even negative things like the dollar being printed into oblivion, or all fiat currencies? Is that a power law as well? Like, can you explain how that works?
No,
can you model anything like that? Or?
The dollar, if you look at inflation over time,
Yeah,
it's an exponential, because basically,
yeah.
even if sometimes inflation can be higher, sometimes it can be smaller, but in average, you can come up with a constant value, right? It doesn't change too much. It fluctuates around some kind of an average. Now, if you have something that is an average over time and is compounded, it becomes an exponential. That is what is typical of exponential. It's a relatively slow exponential, because people think exponentially always means very, very fast. It's the type of growth is fast. There are things that can go faster than exponential, but usually it's one of the fastest type of change that you can have. But it's what is also matter is the rate of change, right? You can have a relatively slow exponential. In comparison with Bitcoin, inflation, it's a slow exponential. And it turns out, by the way, that most assets, like the SP 500, gold, almost all the best stocks that you can imagine, they barely beat this inflation growth. In other words, if you bought Apple 10 years ago, okay, you're okay, or 20 years ago, you're okay relatively to many other things, but you barely beat inflation, in the sense that you kind of protected yourself from this decay of a buying power of the dollar. You didn't do much better. Maybe you did just like 2 times better. I actually calculated. I show that if you take some of the best stocks over the last 25 years, they almost follow the decay of the dollar. Like even real estate, like some here in California, many of the houses, even just around me, it's all $1 million houses, right? 25 years ago, they were much less. But the change that happened is mostly inflation. It can be explained almost by few factors, by inflation. So, that is an important idea to think about. And in general, like I say, so Bitcoin follows this much faster growth that is slowing down in time because a power law has these diminishing returns. It's part of the nature. It's what is different between an exponential and a power law. That a power law over time, the returns every year are going down. But it started with 2 or 3 times a year, and now we are around 40%. So we are beating still even the best of the stocks, okay? And it will take another 20 years to go down to something like 25%. It is still better than most of the stocks, right? That is part of the nature of Bitcoin. You were trying to...
You were talking about the CAGR.
You
were talking about like the compound annual growth rate, basically, in USD
exactly.
terms. Yeah.
So and but you were telling me something else. Sorry, I forgot for a second.
The other,
what you were asking.
It was thinking of in terms of the dollar. So just the dollar itself, like a negative thing being exponential as well. Like, is that a power law itself? Like,
okay, so it's like I say, it's an exponential. It goes, the inflation goes as an exponential. But it's a slow exponential in comparison with Bitcoin. So this is why we can ignore it.
Is that because of a fixed supply versus an infinite supply, or like why is it slower than Bitcoin?
If you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff, and I get you have these guests on, and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great, and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
Because, and that is part also what people don't have a good grasp about it, I think, in the Bitcoin community. Because, okay, so it goes in this way. And in particular, I think this is something that happened recently with a lot of young people. I don't know why they are fixated with this. They believe that eventually what will happen to the US dollar will be the same thing that happened with the Argentinian pesos, right? That it can go hyperinflationary. So when you have something that is hyperinflationary, instead of having a relatively small change in the inflation rate that is like 5, 10, 15%, we are talking about factor of 2 or something, right? Argentina peso, I don't remember what was the worst rate of inflation, but it almost arrived to that point. Once you have something that changes by a factor of 2 and is exponential, it's dramatic. It's like that is a black swan event. You were talking about something that it's crazy, and it's affecting all the economy, makes people poor, and it creates a lot of problems in how people deal with their lives. Entire generational wealths are disappearing. This is why a lot of people in countries like that actually look at Bitcoin as a point of reference. The dollars will not do that. That is also, it's not an integral part of the the vision and the framework that Power Law give us. But I will say it's part of a world view, right? So if you want to go even bigger, now you're going to look at a worldview. And it's kind of Giovanni's worldview, but also I think is what the power law in a certain sense is telling us. So this worldview says something of this type, that the dollar is going to be stable. And notice in kind of almost a prediction I'm going to make. In one end, the dollar is going to be relatively stable. Sure, it's going to continue to be inflationary because that has been inflationary for a long, long time. In particular, became even more once we left the gold standard. That was a good idea to keep it pegged to the dollar, to the gold. We left the gold standard, and now, they print the money, right? That some economists thought it was a great idea, but actually it is not, and Bitcoiners are very sensitive about this topic. So over time is inflationary, but at a relatively controlled pace. It is still terrible as in particular over a relatively long period of time, but Bitcoin can deal with that, right? Because if the inflation started to go even faster, now you will need Bitcoin to beat that. And that is where there is a lot of confusion. And many times I don't even understand what people are at, because there are a group of people, in particular, I notice young people, that not just think, but almost desire that Bitcoin is going to be, that the dollar is going to be hyperinflationary. And hyperinflation means basically is going to do something like the Argentinian pesos. The problem with that is I don't understand how they think if a dollar becomes hyperinflationary. Maybe, you're a young person, maybe you're more aware of this current of thinking. Maybe you can explain it to me. But to me, I don't see how Bitcoin can deal with that, because if that happens, there'll be a lot of problems, not in a localized place like Argentina, where is in fact impacting millions of people, but it's a relatively small percentage. And also, if you compare it in terms of economy, their economy is not that enormous in terms of impact in the world. We are talking about a currency that is used as a reserve, as a way of trading in all over the world. So the entire world will be impacted. The entire world will suffer whatever happens to the dollar. And there will be not really an equivalent, because I'm sure many other currencies, because the world is so interconnected, it's so global, that if you affect something somewhere, in particular something huge like the US economy, that is the largest economy in the world. And not just that, it's connected with all the other economies, in the sense that many countries own dollars, for example, as reserves. All of a sudden, the entire world will be impacted. Why do you think people will jump and start to buy Bitcoin? I don't think so, because we will have serious problem in buying food and buying, stuff that they need. Probably people will rush and buy bread, will rush and buy toilet paper and things like that. They will not focus on investing in Bitcoin. And if they use the dollar that is not valued anymore, that is losing quickly or even suddenly value, they cannot buy a lot of Bitcoin because it's, yes, the price of Bitcoin maybe will change drastically, because now will be valued in a currency that is losing value, and it probably will even break the power law, but it will be meaningless. It will not be the good event that people think, like the price is exploding. It's exploding relatively to something that has lost value. So you both want the dollar to do exactly what has done in all this time, that is inflationary, because we want to get away of that system, and the fact that it's inflationary motivates people to actually get into the Bitcoin network is the response to that. But at the same time, you don't want a catastrophic event like that. And so people sometimes tell me, well, Giovanni, it's not a matter of wanting, it's a matter of what is going to happen. And I tell you, and this is where I go a little bit in more speculative territory, because one thing is to try to understand Bitcoin. But part of understanding Bitcoin, with time, I had to integrate much more information, like, for example, understanding, microeconomics, understanding other topics. But I'm still a student. I'm trying to understand. But my understanding, because I did, and at a certain point, I want to write an entire article about it. The title is going to be something like that: "The End of the World is Not Bullish for Bitcoin." That will be the title of my article. And the article basically will say that, Bitcoin will be our last problem if the dollar goes hyperinflationary. That the impact will be so big that, I think almost there will be things like civil war or maybe even nuclear war, because, part of the power of a huge part of the power of the United States comes from the dollar being the monetary system of the world. And you see, Bitcoin is winning this battle without provoking the dollar directly, right? It's doing it over time. It's doing it in a clever way. It's winning. It's basically like this Zen warrior that wins battles without fighting at all, right? It's just sitting there, and people surrender because they look at how calm and powerful this warrior is. They say, I cannot beat it. And they tried to taunt it. There are many Zen stories. I don't know if you ever read that, like there was this famous, his name is Miyamoto Musashi. And there was, I can tell you the story, it's a cool story. I love Japanese culture. There were some, like many of the time, these famous samurai were challenged, almost like in the Wild West, right? When there was a fast shooter, people were challenging him and say that, because if you killed him, then everybody will know that you are the most famous shooter in the world, right? And so they did the same thing. They challenged each other, and these guys, young people, he was like old, with beard like me, etc. And he was sitting there eating some rice, and they were provoking him. They were trying to challenge him. They were insulting him, how old he was, and so on. And he was listening. He was not reacting, etc. And at a certain point, with these chopsticks, he caught a fly that was flying around him. He caught that fly. And the guys say, okay, let's go, right? Let's not challenge him, because if he could do that, they showed how, still his reflexes, his ability, were still there, right? And they will have been killed. And so they decided not to even challenge him. So he, without doing anything violent against them, he showed them who he was, right? Bitcoin does the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, where you challenge it, he continues to do his own thing, and then people that talk bad about Bitcoin, Saylor, the CEO of BlackRock, they surrender. They go from being enemies of Bitcoin or criticizing Bitcoin. Saylor himself, he was talking to join them. This is what Bitcoin is going to do. And this path is the path that all of us should desire and want, because over time, without creating crises, because all these people, they talk about hyperinflation, the dollar losing all of a sudden value, etc. They don't realize how crazy these scenarios will be. They will be very dramatic. A lot of people will suffer hunger. Probably there will be unrest not just in the United States, but all over the world. It will have to be such a dramatic event that will be, it's not just a black swan event, it will be really a deep, deep crisis, maybe even leading to things like the nuclear war, like I say. I know it sounds crazy, but it's possible that the United States, if it loses this control that it has right now through the dollar, it will provoke a war, right? It has done it before many times. It will create some kind of black flag event, and then maybe attack, create some kind of a war. This is what people in power do when they are pushed against the wall, and this is why Bitcoin is such a powerful thing, because little by little is winning things, and there will be a point, and this is why I'm saying 20 years. Why I'm thinking 20 years, because Bitcoin in 20 years will be something on the order of a few $1 million, and by the time Bitcoin is few $1 million, we are talking about we are talking about the market cap of Bitcoin being on the order of hundreds of trillions of dollars. And that hundreds of trillions of dollars is kind of a critical point because, if you take, for example, all the real estate of the world or all the money in the world, we're talking about 300, 400 trillion dollars. And if Bitcoin is in the order of magnitude, this is why the order of magnitudes are important. By the time we scale, and we are talking about only 2 order of magnitude, right? We are talking, in fact, actually, to go to 1 million, it's only one order. To go to 10 million, that is, when we will get hundreds of trillions of dollars. And we need to go actually, sorry, I say 1 million, but we need about $10 million. By the time Bitcoin is $10 million, it is something on the order of 25 years, 24, 25 years, according to the power law. It will take that time. The market cap will be on the order of hundreds of trillions of dollars. And now we are talking about being on the same order of magnitude than all the wealth on the earth. And so by the time we go there, nations will pay attention. We are not talking about, this strategic reserve that people think that right now, if it happens, it will be the first step in that direction. It will be like a little symbolic gesture because, these strategic reserves are not much bigger than ETFs. I don't know why people will make a big deal. Now, symbolically, they are going to be a big deal because it's the first step where nations start to think about Bitcoin in this strategic way, etc. But the big step will be when they adopt Bitcoin, when they be the Bitcoin standard, when they decide to peg their currency to Bitcoin and say, listen, basically, and it will be, even there will be kind of a way of going around and not saying, oh, we are going to use Bitcoin as our currency, we are pegging it, right? But it's going to be the same. It's just not losing face and say, we're still going to use the dollar, but will be pegged to Bitcoin. That event is going to take time to happen because we need the infrastructure, we need the law. This is also part of what the Bitcoin is about. It's all about giving time, briefing time, because this is why it's slowing down. This is why we have a diminishing return. We cannot do what Bitcoin was doing when it was $20. We need more time for all these things to take place. And so the power law allows for that, because this is exactly this idea of scaling. As the system becomes bigger and bigger, it takes more time to grow, because that's how these natural things and cities, etc., work. You need time to go to the next step, to go to the next order of magnitude, because you are dealing with something that is now, $20 trillion and not few $1 million when it was, when Bitcoin was worth it a cent. It cannot be. It cannot be this constant exponential growth. This is why Bitcoin is not an exponential. It has to be something that is graded like this, right? That is slowing down. It's not slowing down in a scale point of view. If you look at scale, if you focus only on scale stays constant, right? The proportion between the scale of price and the scale of time stays constant.
Linear, it just goes through the
it goes up.
Yeah.
But that is if you're thinking in scales, right? From a scale point of view, nothing changes. It's the same scaling. But from a human point of view, because humans are not used to think unless you're trained, this is why I want more people to read that book, Scale. It takes time. Even me, it takes time to start to think in this way of scales. If you're thinking in terms of scale, nothing changes. If you're thinking in human terms, because we live linear times, we live, this is how we evolve over time. Now, maybe a mountain, if a mountain was a living being, maybe mountains thinks in log time instead of linear time, right? If we were beings that lived thousands or maybe even millions of years, maybe we acquired a different way of thinking about time, of feeling about time. But right now we are linear, so we need a translation, right? And that translation, it looks bad for some people because they want everything now, right? But one of the beautiful things, right, for example, in the book, the Bitcoin standard, is this idea of a preference time, right? Bitcoin teaches us about having a slow preference time, that just give it its time, right? It's still pretty fast because we're not talking about 100 years. We are talking about 20 years, right? In 20 years, for a currency to go from an asset to go from 100,000 to 10 million seems crazy, right? One Bitcoin, $10 million. Can you imagine when in the beginning was like the first transaction, how much Bitcoin you could buy with $1 when there was the first transaction? 5,000. So the first USD to Bitcoin transaction that happened in 2010, it was $1 for 5,000. $1 for 5,000 Bitcoin. This was even before the pizza. It was actually one of the collaborators of Satoshi. They created, they wanted to show that actually people could transact Bitcoin for dollars, that it was not just a video game, there was something serious, that you could use it as a real currency. And so they created this exchange. It was like an improvised exchange where you will send to this guy. He was doing it. He had a bunch of Bitcoin that he was mining, or Satoshi was sending to him, and he put he created this website where you could go and buy from him. Mostly, you will send him PayPal, and he will send you Bitcoin. And the first time this ever happened, it was $1 for 5,000 Bitcoin. Can you imagine? And one day it would be $10 million. Can you imagine? This is crazy. It's like science fiction. Like if you wrote a book 20 years ago explaining that there was such a thing, people will have laughed and say, what are you talking about? Something that goes from, in 15 years, in 20 years, in 30. It's ridiculous, right? It never happened in the history of mankind, such a thing. There is no any type of thing that people value. We went from, just few cents all the way to millions of dollars in a small amount of time. Nothing. And so this is why we need a different way of thinking, and the scaling approach is the right way of thinking, because Bitcoin has behaved in this way. And the fact that there are all these other things around us, like cities, for example, right? Cities probably is the best example because it's a human phenomenon. Many people sometimes dismiss the power law because they say, well, okay, maybe power law work for planets, we work for organisms, but for sure don't work for human beings. Well, it turns out a lot of things we do are like that. City is one example. There are also sometimes some people challenge me about history. They told me, oh, history is not a power law. And it took me literally 5 minutes to find, for example, that the time in between wars is a power law. And, it's an historical event. Wars are one of the things that change history a lot. But we could find other things that I'm pretty sure over time in the history of mankind follow power laws. There are very precise reasons why these things happen. It's about mechanism. In physics, we are very interested about what are the causes, how things happen. And power law are all about interactions between agents and links, right? Networks and things that multiply. So if you have things that two people interacting each other, is not their effect is not like if let's say there are 4 people, right? The effect is not 4, is actually 16 because it goes up with the square or some kind of a power, right? It's a multiplicative effect. It's not an additive effect. A little change create a huge big change. A little change in time here, for example, creates a big change in price. So this is the story of Bitcoin. So to go back to the inflation stuff, right? My vision is that the US dollar will stay stable, and the reason is exactly the reason that I was describing, because the consequences of that will be so big that even if we go in that direction, there will be forces that keep it stable. Like the other countries will come together and will do things, will take action. Even enemies like Russia, Russia doesn't want the United States to be completely destroyed, right? And because when things like that happen, or China doesn't want, right? Because they are still working together. They are partners in commerce, etc. Yes, you want to compete, but you don't want the other completely to disappear, because it will not be good for the exactly. For the global economy will not be good, and they are too much interconnected. It's different from other time in history where yes, there was some commerce, there was some communication, but there was a lot
Batman needs Joker.
Exactly, and in general, it's more like as much as we want to put boundaries around our countries, it's really like one big huge global thing, right? And sure, I know that some people don't like the idea of the Earth being global, right? Because anything, if
globalism
you
fight
push,
versus nationalism.
if you're pushing any idea too much in any direction, it can always be bad, right? If you're making too much globals and they don't give a chance for the local economy to grow, etc., that can be bad. So the globalists, right, the evil globalists, is silly, because yes, if you push an agenda too far, anything, right, even a good thing, can be bad. But in general, the world is like that. Everything is interconnected, and you cannot. And the dollar has a central role until Bitcoin will take over. And so we want a smooth transaction. We want transition. We want these to be smooth for the next 20, 25 years. It will be still painful because the inflation will continue to go up. We'll continue to create more and more debt, but we can tolerate
minimize
it
pain.
Yeah. We try to minimize. And then Bitcoin, give Bitcoin the chance to win without any crisis. It will win by itself. And so that is my vision, that I think it will not happen because of how the dollar works, how the global economy works. Do I have a proof? Do I have a mathematical way of showing that? No, it's mostly intuition, it's mostly reasoning. And, this is one of the things that many times I try to avoid because I want to support everything with data. Now, I could do a deeper study to show that it's very unlikely that it happens, but, I agree with that. It's mostly speculation. My intuition tells me it cannot happen. It will not happen. And it's a good thing that it doesn't happen. In fact, this is what we want. What people, sometimes I hear this expression, right? Oh, it's like a band-aid that we want to reap because, yes, we can have a lot of pain, but over a short amount of time, and then it's over. No, it's not going to be like that. It's like you're cutting your arm off, you're cutting your leg off if the dollar inflates, and it will be dramatic. It will be something that, if it happens, but I don't think it happens, it will not be like a band-aid. It will not be like a little flesh wounds. It will be literally cutting off your arms or even your legs. It's going to be a big deal, and many people will suffer, and it's possible that will even lead to a nuclear war. I'm serious about that. So it's not something that people should talk about almost like in a wishful thinking way, right? Like, oh, we want that to happen. Now, we should be prepared to everything, but I'm not sure you can be prepared for something like that, right? I'd rather, and if anything, actually, I think that actually Bitcoin is a stabilizing effect, because more and more, instead of people becoming depraved and say, okay, let's carpe diem, right? Let's live a day. Let's spend everything we have. In any way, the dollar is losing value, because in fact, part of the reason why we do that is because we want you to spend a lot of money all the time and not save anything, right? But because of Bitcoin, people start to save. They consider even fun. It's a fun exercise to save and think about your future. And that is some of the things that our grandfathers were doing. We were putting Italy, for example, is very famous for that. It's a country where everybody saves money, because it kind of comes from the agricultural mindset, right? The agricultural cultures. They want to save, right, for bad times, right? They need to create granary. They need to put things aside because one year they harvested bad, the other one is good. So you want to keep, a reserve of your resources, and that is a new way of thinking, that is spreading between new people, young people. They are motivated to save because of Bitcoin, etc. And I think over the long period of time, in particular if Bitcoin absorbs more and more of the wealth of the world, we became a stabilizing effect. So that is probably maybe something that can be even modeled, that given that a lot of assets are moving towards Bitcoin, the impact of inflation is going to be less and less overall. And so I don't think we go there, and I hope that we don't go there. So that is my comments about what you were saying about hyperinflation and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and you bring up a great point. It's capitalism will flourish under a Bitcoin standard because you actually have, Bitcoin is the only free market we've ever had, and because of fiat, because of broken money, which turned into currencies, now we've devolved into globalism. And I've seen a lot of people confusing those things. They think inflation is part of capitalism inherently, and they're, what most people don't understand. Obviously, government-run schools don't teach people the difference. And the money is the base layer of the economic system you choose. So that is, to your point, that's going to really change going forward. And in talking about all these systems, networks, we've talked about bodies, cities, all these things can use power laws. How does that change? I'd love your thought. Have you unpack this a little bit about how, like, when Bitcoin's the only finite thing we have besides our time. It's the only finite thing we've really ever discovered as human beings. So how does that change? How does it affect the power law or change the power law? Like, at some point there could be, theoretically, there's no Bitcoin on exchanges anymore. And everyone's saying, hey, I'm not giving it up. How does the power law account for that with this thing where we found where it's truly finite?
And before I talk about that, I wanted to say something more about your idea. You mentioned capitalism. I actually think so. There are not a lot of good thinkers, maybe one or two, that started to discuss how hyper-Bitcoinization world will look like. I think it's so we could imagine and we can come up with scenarios, but I think it will be such a revolutionary thing that it will be. It's very difficult to think about it. What exactly will happen, and it's possible that actually we overcome or we go beyond capitalism. That we find something that is even better than capitalism. That is actually it has some components of all the economical systems, right? There is even some of a socialist idea. No, people don't like that, but some ideas could be good. Because, for example, we are working together. Like, for example, as Bitcoiners, we don't think we are in competition with each other, right? We are actually helping each other. More people there are, better it is, right? We want more and more people to be orange peel. It's something that usually doesn't happen with capitalism, where actually you compete over resources, right? And that kind of a little bit leads to the other component of the question. And this is one of the most controversial topics when I mention it. Bitcoin is finite, is not scarce. And again, I'm writing a book about all these ideas, and there will be a big chapter on this idea. Now, there is one concept in physics, because physics is my guide. There is an entire branch of physics called econophysics, where we are trying to apply principles from physics in trying to understand economical system, social system like cities, etc. So many these are analogies. They don't apply one to one, but they are guiding principles. One of the things that happen in nature, right? And nature, if you think about, is the ultimate source of creation, right? Where everything comes from.
Yeah.
In nature, there is this idea of conservation of different quantities, like, for example, conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, conservation of angular momentum. Many different properties are conserved. What conservation of charge? For example, if I create particles from energy, because there is it is allowed to go from energy to matter and matter to energy, right? E equal mc squared. You can transform one into another. So I could take a lot of energy and I can create particles. And we see that in the labs, etc. We have done it before, where we create two particles, matter, directly from energy, right? Because energy doesn't have a charge, it doesn't have an electrical charge, it's neither positive or negative. When you create these two particles, they need to have a total charge of 0. So one will be negative and the other one will be positive, in such a way that whatever you had in the beginning, so 0 charge, you're going to have as a sum in the end. right? It's one of the laws that we observe. You follow me? So this is called conservation of charge. You started with a zero charge, you need to end up. And it happened in many other reactions where you calculate how much charge you have in the beginning. When you allow some transformation, you have to have the same charge in the end, the total charge. You can have different things, a neutron decaying in a proton and a positron. So it's going to have a positive charge and a negative charge, an electron. A proton and an electron, and then the two charges make zero, and this is how a neutron decay. It decays in two different particles. Now, the same thing I think applies with Bitcoin. We have a conservation of money principle, because when I buy a Bitcoin, somebody needs to give me the Bitcoin. So in a sense, they created a negative Bitcoin. There is a negative value Bitcoin in their ledger. This is how a ledger works, right? You have to move something from one person to another, to one wallet to another, and you have a positive entry and a negative entry. The two cancel each other. That is how a perfect ledger works. So to create a perfect ledger, Satoshi needed to keep this conservation of money principle. It's a very deep analogy with the idea of how nature works. Nature works by splitting things and keeping everything the same, right? So the total number of Bitcoin stays the same. They are just when you buy or exchange Bitcoin, you have a transfer of Bitcoin from one side to another. But in a sense, if you want to think it like that, it's like creating a positive Bitcoin and a negative Bitcoin, and the two cancel and keep the system constant. That is what is the big deal about the finite ledger, that you cannot have a perfect ledger if the amount of coins is not finite. Now, in theory, you could have a slow growth or whatever, but it's even better if it is finite, okay? And it's something that can be explored, understood. It's an interesting idea to look at it in that way. Now, what many people confuse is that finite amount of Bitcoin with scarcity. They think at a certain point we will run out of Bitcoin. That is one of the things that it's almost disgusting to me when people think about that, because first of all, it's not real. It's not what happens. There is absolutely no evidence of that. The market is an active market, is a live market. People buy and sell Bitcoin all the time. You have data about that. You can show that there are long-term holders that when the price reaches certain values, they sell. And the ETFs sell. They don't always buy. They sometimes sell. Maybe Saylor doesn't sell. Maybe because he made a public announcement that he will never sell. Right. Fine. Okay. Maybe there are other hodlers that don't ever sell and we will never sell. But the market will come to a still. And in fact, your Bitcoin will literally go to zero if everybody didn't sell. Because if you have a market that is not liquid, where everybody says, I'm just holding my Bitcoin, then nothing happens. And sure, the price will stay there, but it's a meaningless price, because a price has to be dynamic, has to be something that people agree on it all the time. There is an exchange. It's based on exchanging. It's based on dynamic. If the price was still, if the price of Bitcoin stayed the same, this is what last time it was an exchange, because it's always based on the last time somebody bought Bitcoin or sold Bitcoin. It will lose meaning. It's like it will be a dead thing. Bitcoin will be dead. It will be a dead asset. So again, it's one of these things that for some reason, people don't have a right framework. They don't think in the right way. You want Bitcoin to grow, and adoption means people holding on Bitcoin a certain amount, but also people exchanging Bitcoin. You want both of them, and you can have them, right? It's not contradictory, because for example, one time I made a model, that is, again, it's some of the things that I'm trying over time. It will take time to teach this concept. I made this model where I envision this thing. It's a play model, like in physics we call them toy model. But basically, it works in this way. Imagine we produce all the Bitcoin from the start, 21 million, right? And Satoshi owned these coins. He produced them all at once, and he owned them. And then anytime somebody joins the network, and if you look at the adoption curve, it looks like basically goes like, made even a video that people can go and watch in my YouTube channel. We made with my son. My son is a video maker. We make an animation of this thing. But basically, if you take it literally, it goes like this: the number of Bitcoiners that join the network is 3, because we see a power law that is a cube of time. So that means there are 3 people joining, multiplied by the number of people that are already there in the network, divided by the age of the system. It's actually a precise formula. 3 times the number of Bitcoiners that are already there, divided by the age of the system. This is how every day. Now, you don't take this literally. It's an average, right? But if we take it literally, the day 1, we had only Satoshi, so 1 person. So you take 3, you multiply by Satoshi, 1, and then you divide it by the age of the system. It is 1 day. So you get 3. So day 1, there are 3 people coming in the network, right? Was it true? I don't know. Maybe there were 5. There were not many, because there were not many people, even if you look at some of his Satoshi emails, etc., that even understood what he was doing, even in his very small circle of cypherpunks, right? So 3 people joined the network. Alfini was one of them, right? So they joined three people. Now, these 3 people go and orange peel other people. So now we have a total number of 4 people. 3 times 4 is 12. We divide by 2 because it's day 2. We get 6 more people. So in total, now we have 10. And you can continue to do this over and over again. And how I did it was, so this is actually a pretty good simplification of actually how the orange peeling works. It follows this formula. Now, the game I played to talk about this finiteness of the number of coins was, every time the people come in, Satoshi redistributes uniformly the coins. He gives the same amount of coins to everybody, including himself, right? So by day 1, because we are a total number of 4, everybody has 25%, right? And then more and more people join, and the coins are distributed. Now, the only thing is, every time new people come in, by some mechanism, it is consensus, etc. Now, this is one of the things I need to work and trying to understand how the market somehow knows that it needs to value the price of Bitcoin with the square of the number of participants, because this is how it works. If you look at the data, the relationship between addresses and price is about the square. So the new people come in, they say, listen, we pay this amount of dollars to get in the network. You need to pay a value that is proportional, right? So, for example, the second day we go up, right, from being 4, we go up to 10, right? Because 6 new people come. Now, you guys are going to pay 10 to the square, 100, right? $100. So if we paid $1, you need to pay this amount. So if you do that game, where basically these are all the numbers that we observe in Bitcoin, how the system grows, what is the value that is assigned to Bitcoin. But the only thing that is different, instead of some people accumulating a lot of Bitcoin, the Bitcoins are distributed uniformly. Do you know what happens if you look at what is the value of every single person? Because you will think, how can I become wealthier in this way if I distribute everything? It will not happen. You do. You actually, over time, everybody is gaining, even if I distribute everything uniformly. And so it means that by selling some of your Bitcoin, because the only way that new people can come in is by you selling some of your Bitcoin. So somebody needs to do it, right? Maybe you don't do it, but in this toy model, I did it where everybody does it. Everybody say, hey guys, it's ideal. It's a little toy. Like I say, it's a simulation, right? It's a simulation where they decided why don't we do it in this way, where everybody sells a little bit, and we can bring in new people, and we can make the system bigger, right? Because it's simpler to do it in that way. Yeah. And what I show is that even in that case, where everybody's selling, every single body sells, the system still goes up, and it reproduces exactly the same price growth that we see. Exactly. Nothing changes. Now, we don't have that system. It means that, it still happen, even if some people hold on the coin. Mm-hmm. But this experiment, I wrote an entire article. I don't know. It should be viral. Everybody should talk about it, because it destroys this idea that the price goes up because of scarcity. If everybody sells and it makes the Bitcoin available to everybody else, it's not scarce. And I got exactly the same behavior. You see? Do you understand what I'm trying to explain?
It's fascinating.
But it has nothing to do with people, not selling their Bitcoin or leaving the exchange. This is a completely wrong way of thinking about Bitcoin. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do instead with the opposite, with the fact that more and more people adopt Bitcoin. The people that talk about scarcity, they have to explain to me how they can reconcile the idea that they want more and more people join the network, right? Because you say, hey, we are, you see, it's illogical. They don't use critical thinking. How can you say at the same time we are early? We use all this terminology, right? Because I follow a lot of these people. We are early. We are not early, by the way. We have only 2 orders of magnitude to go. We have already done 8. That is another way of thinking about scale that tells you, no, we are not early. We are actually almost done. And they say things like this: we are early. That means more people are going to join in, and at the same time, they insist about scarcity. How these people can join in, if Bitcoin is scarce? It's illogical. You want a balance. You want a balance between holding, because remember, even in my toy model, you are not selling everything. You are just selling enough for the new people, and you need to sell less. Why? Because the Bitcoin value goes up. And so if they divide everything equally in that little toy model that they did, they are selling less and less, because the value goes up, and they distribute it among everybody. There are more people to distribute the wealth around, but in the every single person, their their asset, their total asset, goes up, because they are distributing uniformly, but the price goes up with the square of the people that join in. And that grows as a power law, right? So the total value goes with the times 6 up. And so that are things that people, unless you try to find the right angle, trying to look at all these principles from mathematics, etc., people use their intuition to understand something that is, complex, like Bitcoin. And they fail. Many times they use the wrong thing, because really Bitcoin is teaching us to leave these ideas of scarcity, of Black Friday. This is what it reminds me when people say, oh, we're running out of Bitcoin and there are less coins on the exchanges. First of all, I always challenge, say, can you show me a graph that shows that less coin in the exchange pushes the price up? Nobody ever done it. There is no such a single graph that shows the relationship between the data, because people are usually not challenged in that way to show a relationship between two things. They make these claims. They say, oh, we are running out of coins in the exchange. And they are trying to imply that the price will go up. But when you actually look at the data, there is not evidence that has any impact at all. That is one of the things that I argue with people all the time. But, I'm right, because the data is the data. You cannot argue with the data. And in my little toy model, I show that even if everybody was selling a little bit of their Bitcoin, so, if they do exactly the opposite of what they say, that, nobody's selling, the price goes up, and it goes exactly like it did in the past. They reproduce exactly the same mechanism. what is needed is more people adopting Bitcoin. That is really what is needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different story. It's not about scarcity. It's about adoption. It's very, very different idea. Yeah,
it's fascinating. It's a lot of, I feel like being in Bitcoin is a lot of like two ships passing in the night. Like people are always like arguing like two different time, realities. And it's always, everyone has these great ideas, but a lot of it is, to your point. Yeah. I mean, you can't just hoard it. The network dies if everyone just hodls and no one sells. The network dies. It's a human system.
right.
And if you don't let any more humans in, then it dies. Or if people don't care about sound money or they don't care about Bitcoin, it dies. So those are, it's really fascinating when you put it in those terms, because people just don't think of it generally. That's not the mainstream narrative within Bitcoin. Obviously, it's a different way of.
It is a pity, because Bitcoiners should teach us to leave the old way of thinking, right? Because we have done this since humans were around, right? We thought about resources. I have more than you. If I want your resources, I'm coming and stealing them from you, or maybe fighting you in a war, killing you.
Yeah.
It's all about that, right? And I think Bitcoin is the opposite of that. But Bitcoin tell us that we should work together, we should cooperate, we should share, and then also some people that are, from a more, let's say, if you want to talk about politics, right-wing kind of thinking. If you talk about sharing, they don't like. But it's, it goes beyond that, because it's a type of sharing where it's not sharing where you give away something for free, because being part of a network, it requires an investment.
Producing value.
It requires commitment. It requires you to be, stay with these through the ups and downs, changing your mind, growing, thinking. It's participating. It's like building something together, where we are building this city that follows our law, and everybody's is like a cathedral, right? When in ancient time, we did these beautiful masterpieces, because the entire town, everybody was coming. There were some people that had more skills; they could do sculpture and things like that. Other people could simply bring bricks to the to the masons that were putting them together, the cathedral. Everybody was contributing. Some people were making bread. When a cathedral was built, the entire city was coming together, through many different contributions, by paying some, donations, by putting some of their time, by doing something. And they created these beautiful masterpieces. Same thing, Bitcoin has to do with people coming together and participating and contributing different things. So this is why I really hate it. It's one of these things where I was more aggressive in the beginning when I came to, because I have been working for 12 years, but I started to get some fame in the last year or so, because, there was a famous economics, let's say like this, YouTuber that featured me. His name is Andre Jik. This is how everybody started to know me, because of his video. This is how he brought me to, even if it is the model itself is 6 years old, and I've been working on other models and other way of understanding power laws in general since 12 years. But when it came, like basically 1 year ago, when around February, March, I started to express these ideas, and I thought that people will love them, that a lot of people will support it, because it was a new way of thinking about Bitcoin, not just with power law, this idea of scarcity, etc. There's another thing that I'm kind of a contrarian, like almost. I saw some people talking about this, but maybe there is one article about how Bitcoin is actually abundant, but even that article didn't catch the entire breadth of ideas, right? To me, Bitcoin is abundant. It's not scarce at all. It's finite and abundant at the same time. And when I started to express these ideas, I saw so much negativity. Many people blocked me. They started to insult me. They started to attack me. They started to say all kinds of things. I think it's one of these things that people are so attached to it, because You see, when we have difficult things like Bitcoin or complex things, because Bitcoin is simple and difficult at the same time, right? It's full of incredible contradictions, beautiful contradictions, like all the amazing things. People need some framework, right? We need some kind of tool to open the doors, right? And for many people, this idea of scarcity, because it's so ancestral, we lived in a scarce world for a long, long time. We are going towards a world of abundance where we will have almost everything available with AI, maybe nanotechnology. There are all these new technologies that are bringing more and more abundance. Many times we create fake scarcity. This is why I don't like the idea that Bitcoin is a manufactured scarcity, because things like diamonds are that, right? People create a sense of they stop actually production of diamonds, but diamonds will be much cheaper if they allowed all the diamonds that are created all the time, are digged all the time, to be being distributed. But you can make artificial diamonds that are almost indistinguishable from the natural ones. But even that is carb, because otherwise the price will go to nothing. And so it's an artificial scarcity, right? It gives value to something. I don't think Bitcoin needs to be associated with that, to some kind of artificial scarcity. It's ridiculous. It's the other way around. It's the fact that Bitcoin actually has inherent value. And I'm writing an entire article about where the value of Bitcoin is. But just to give you an idea, what we just described, that ledger is like one of the most important invention of mankind. It's not that ledgers were not invented before, but a ledger that is electronic, that is not falsifiable, that is that you cannot play with it, that is eternal, that is in particular decentralized, that it doesn't depend on somebody keeping track. It does it everything. Is from a financial point of view, is almost like the holy grail. Like, I don't understand when people say it's not valuable. It's more valuable than gold. It's more valuable because everything else, gold, it's an approximation. It's an analog approximation to what Bitcoin does. So it's not the other way around. It's not that Bitcoin is the digital gold. Is that gold is the analog Bitcoin. It's trying to do in a bad way what Bitcoin is doing right now. And that is actually, maybe I should use that slogan and diffuse it, right? It's the other way around. It's actually gold. It's a bad approximation of what the ideal system is in terms of exchange, in terms of creating some kind of reference value for mankind. And Bitcoin does it perfectly, and it's the solution. You don't even need something better, because Bitcoin does it as good as possible. You could argue something about how fast the transactions are, but we are solving that too with layer 2, etc. So that will be solved eventually too. There is not a problem. But in terms of settling transactions, in making them finite, making final, and making them decentralized and recorded forever, Bitcoin does it perfectly. And it solves this problem once and forever. And everything else, from shells to gold, whatever, has been an approximation of what Bitcoin does. So just that gives an enormous practical value to Bitcoin that very few people even recognize. But there are many others. The fact that it is a network, there are a lot of things that all work together that makes Bitcoin this valuable. In fact, is undervalued. It should be valuable as the entire wealth of the world that eventually will. This is where Bitcoin is going. It's undervalued by a factor of few hundred. We are still have 100 pair valuation ahead of us. So these are ideas that I want people start to think, little by little. I know that the scarcity idea is something that many people use as a key to comprehend what Bitcoin is, but it's the wrong concept. The finite amount is important also because it avoids devaluation, right? It avoids some third party coming in, like a government, and say, "Oh, I'm going to make more Bitcoin," and then it's not just making more Bitcoin that is the problem. The problem when they print is that they give all this money to only few people. Because if it was only a matter of adding a zero, right? Imagine the same, let's add a zero to everything. Nothing will change. Absolutely nothing will change, right? Now it takes $10 to buy what you were buying with $1, but your pay also goes up by the same amount, right? Your stipend goes up by the same amount, right? You add a zero to everything, including paying. It will not change anything. The problem with printing is that they print and then they give to only few people, like the banks, for example, right? Then the banks give it to some, special interest, and it's all about redistributing the resources in a very client type of way, right? It's based politicized way. That is the problem, and everybody else loses, right? All of us lose because of that. They gain and everybody loses. That is where the problem of printing is. It's not by simply inflating equally everything, because if you add only a zero, nothing changes, right? It's true. It's exactly the same thing as before. That is not the problem, and so the problem is avoiding a third party to manipulate the monetary system, and the fact that it's finite avoids that, because at a certain point Satoshi was even considering allowing some change over time in one early version by committee. Like a committee comes together and say, can we have 1,000 more Bitcoin, right, or 10,000 more Bitcoin, and he said, that will create also some problems, because if a committee comes together, we have to debate and discuss, and then it's arbitrary. Let's make it fixed. And actually, weirdly enough, nature exactly uses the same way to create everything. It just say, I'm going to create this fixed quantity of something, and when I create something, I just make it one positive, one negative, and I keep the same amount, right? And from the start. And this is exactly how Bitcoin works, by redistributing everything. Now, how an entire economy can work with that when once is used as the monetary system is something that I want to think about, but I still cannot completely figure it out. It's going to be interesting, because even past experiences, right? The closest thing one who could try to see, okay, how did it work when nations use the gold as the monetary standard, right? And so, in a certain sense, we were coming close to that, but it's not quite, because, like I say, it's an approximation to that.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think the gold bugs. 15 years ago when I was getting into all this and really learning, I came from the gold end of this spectrum, gold and silver, and that was the thing that the gold and silver guys used to say all the time. Well, there's because the story's always been, well, there's not enough gold and silver to work in the economy, and obviously it's even less with Bitcoin. There's only 21 million, so it was always, well, the purchasing power will go up. Like you said, there's a fixed amount, but it's not scarce in the sense that you can subdivide it. It can be, infinitely divided. I mean, you can have, if you're not printing more, obviously, but each piece can become worth more. Obviously, you can purchase more, more loaves of bread. And I think that's the thing, again, that confuses people. And that's where you can run the economy on it, at least in my belief, because we tried it in this other system, but they had some inflation rate with gold and silver, and you can't move it over space quickly and easily with final settlement. So this seems to be the only option humans have discovered where we can do all that and remedy all that, and each piece becomes more and more valuable over time, solving that problem. So it's absolutely fascinating.
And also,
go ahead.
And Satoshi himself say that you could add smaller units, right? It doesn't have to be 100 million sats. It can be more than that. It could be several billions, because it will not change if you increase the number of zeros uniformly,
right,
through everybody. It will just make it more practical, because now you have a smaller unit. But it will not change anything. Your amount of Bitcoin, the value associated with your investment will be the same. There will be not a dilution. The dilution happens when it's not uniform, because some people gain and some people lose, etc. And that is a problem with printing, like we just said.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
and Bitcoin solves all these problems. Just it's a little bit difficult to think what will happen once we have a hyper-Bitcoinization in terms of things like loans. How do you structure a loan in a I think we will solve all these problems. It's just that we will have to come up with new ideas and new solutions, but
Yeah.
the world will go in that direction, and the beauty of it is that
Absolutely.
Bitcoin does it fast enough, but at the right pace, at the right time. This is entire idea of a power law that is taking longer, but it's the right amount of time. It's not too long, it's not too short. It needs to time to scale. And 20 years, to have this change that will be, one of the biggest change humankind has ever had in terms of how it organizes itself and how the people's relationships are. Because even if you don't want to have a materialistic way of thinking, that everything has to do with money, you cannot avoid it. Everything has to do. Even the most spiritual people, in the end, they need to eat, they need to have a shelter. It doesn't matter, right? It's money, and that actually one of the things, I grew up thinking, I am a scientist. I don't want to have anything to do with money. My father has a restaurant. He's a business person. Whatever. I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be a person of a mind. I thought money was a dirty thing, right? And Bitcoin actually changed my understanding about that. Now I think actually, I think about money in a completely different way, because I think it's about value. It's human value, and everything we exchange, everything we do, even internally, it's all about value. And sure, in this case, is something physical. Even if some people think that Bitcoin is physical, it is. But in the end, it's not how it is represented, but what represents, right? It represents how you think about time, how you think about value, right? The fact, for example, that you don't want to rush and decide, oh, I would like Bitcoin to explode to $1 million tomorrow. Well, maybe that is good for you, but it's not good for the system. Because the system will react where the price will correct itself very quickly, and many people will lose money because we start to join the system. You want to think about value in a different way than just in a selfish way. You want to start to think about what is the good for all of us, right? And Bitcoin is representing exactly that. Is this these are things that is grow. Yeah, it grows over time. We are working together. We are join. It's also something bigger than us. One of the reasons I joined this movement, and I think many people join, is because maybe at different degrees, maybe different angles, all of us think that Bitcoin is bigger than ourselves, right? It's a cause that is bigger than us, that we really want to. And this is one of the beautiful things about young people. They want to change the world. They want to make a better place. Sometimes I think we are a little bit misguided because we have this crazy idea about hyperinflation, about band-aids, etc. But it takes time to think about stuff, right? You can be right in certain things and wrong in other things. But what is right is their desire for change, that we want a better world, we want a fair world. Even if it is not, let's, give everybody a pony. It's not like that.
Right.
It's something much more fairer, actually. Work hard, even just understanding and studying Bitcoin, it's hard work, and making that decision in joining and saving, for example, buying Bitcoin, moving instead of spending, and satisfying yourself on the moment, you're deferring, your gains to the future, right? You're saying, I'm going to look at my future, or maybe even my children's future. It's a completely different way of sharing and growing together, that has to do also with merit, because it takes merit. It's to actually being a Bitcoiner. I have a lot of respect. It doesn't matter how different maybe sometimes our worldviews, but we are all together in this, because I can see how difficult of a mental process is to actually understand all these things, even just to get Bitcoin at any level at all. So all these things are very important, and they are part of the big picture. And I think the power law, if you really studied and if you really go deep, is basically an answer for almost all these things. This is why I call the power law a theory. It's a theory, it's a framework. Theory in science means like you have a complete, coherent picture of a phenomena, right? It's different from what people think that is, this is just valid in theory. No, it's actually in science we use a theory. Theory is the apex of scientific exploration. Is when you have enough information, enough understanding of a phenomena where you put it together with a coherent picture. Of course, you can improve it, you can modify it, you can make it bigger, but it should give you an explanation for almost everything. And I think the power law does, right? It tries to give you an idea where we are going, why Bitcoin is valuable, what is happening with Bitcoin, with this network, with this scaling. And he has some kind of inner intelligence, because the fact that he found a power law among all the other possible ways that Bitcoin could have developed, it means that he has some kind of internal self-organizing principles acting on it, right? Even if we are not, every single Bitcoiner is not necessarily aware of it. It works without us being aware, right?
Yep, absolutely. What I got a couple more for you here. I want to talk about just the S-curve adoption that's very popular, and I want to talk about I'd be remiss to not talk about price prediction here over the next year, maybe this cycle with you. You being the power law guy, I have to ask you that, and then just MicroStrategy quickly too. So the first thing is S-curve. The S-curve, obviously the technology adoption, how does that playing, because obviously that gets thrown around all the time with Bitcoin. They get lumped in together.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with the power law? How do those work together?
Yeah, and I'm going to show you some graphs because of that. All right, so that is something that people mention all the time, right? Because again, it's one of these things where people throw some ideas and they make some analogies, but they don't take the time to go deep, and trying actually to. The beauty with Bitcoin is that we have all the data. We have the data in front of us, right? It's very different from other systems, our financial system, where the data is kind of hidden. For example, sure, public companies, they make a report, right? They tell us how much money, how much sell they had, how much expenses, it's part of their reporting, but it's still, we don't have all the information that maybe the management has, right? With Bitcoin, everything is transparent. And so we can learn a lot by looking at the data. Now, the best data for adoption, like we discussed before, it's addresses. Now, it's not a perfect measure of adoption, because we don't know every single Bitcoiner. Actually, is a good thing. It's not like you write down your name, I bought Bitcoin this much, etc. this day. That kind of information is not available. But the addresses themselves are a measure of the activity of a network. Actually, probably even better, because we like to think about Bitcoiners, joining the network, but it's really how active the network is, right? And addresses are a good measure for that. So in a network, remember, the nodes are the individual components, right? And then there are these things called links, that are how these individual components interconnect with each other, how they communicate with each other. So there are two elements, the nodes and the links. Now, people have done a lot of studies on how networks grow, or in particular social networks, where human beings are involved and in interchange information. So I have this article here. This article is an article mostly from Chinese scholars, and this article, in fact, was all about showing that S curves do not apply to social networks. And maybe we want to do one step backward and explain what S curve is. So an S curve, and many people use this idea, and there is one reason why they use it all the time, and I will tell you in one moment why they use it. Not just because technology seems to follow this pattern of growth, but because many influencers want to arrive to a particular statement, and the statement is this, or a particular punchline, right? The punchline is they want this very fast growth. They basically are saying that we are early in the adoption cycle. So basically, okay, let's start from the beginning. So many technology follow this pattern. Basically, see, there are two different graphs here that we are comparing. One is what is called a distribution, which is the blue line. And basically, it's kind of like height. Now imagine you have a population, you have some people that are very tall, some people that are very short, and most people are in the middle, right? And you have this famous curve, which is called the bell curve, right? Because it looks like a bell. The technical name is called a Gaussian. Scientists call a Gaussian or normal distribution. But basically, it's anytime you have some kind of random phenomena where you have some kind of average, and then as you go away from the average, you're going to have less and less people in both directions, right? So in this case, we are talking about people adopting some kind of technology, like cell phones, refrigerators, and people have shown this applies to many of these technology. We have online, you can find graphs where you can show that the refrigerators, all the time. And the reason why you get this S curve, so this S curve is the result of this blue curve. They are related to each other. In fact, I explain exactly how they are related. As we get, so in the beginning, right, of this phenomena, imagine you have a refrigerator, television, etc. You will have few people, usually rich people, because in the beginning these technologies are very expensive. Or rich people, maybe with Bitcoin, people that are innovators, people that are maybe in technology, a lot of people that were kind of computer scientists. They understood Bitcoin from that point of view, right? So there are few. And with time, they grow. They have an early adopter, early majority. And when you arrive to that point, basically that is the average, right? So most people join at this point. That is what the average means, is the most likely value when you have this kind of distribution. And this is when the majority joins. And then over time, because we are running out of people that can adopt the technology, right? Because we have a finite population, not necessarily in the world, but people that will be interested in that technology, or we have the means to buy it, but they go down and they start to be less and less because basically almost everybody else has this technology, and so it's going to be a smaller number. And if the yellow curve represents the total, right? Imagine I'm running a total sum of all these people, right? How many I have. Yeah. And you can see in the beginning, this curve grows, and it grows in an exponential fashion. And then it goes faster and faster. And by the time when everybody joins, when we have this majority of people joining, there is a sudden change. And here is a relatively gentle growth, but it depends how narrow this distribution is. Like if there is a sudden change, right, when we reach that late majority, or early, late majority, when the majority of people joins, this curve can be quite steep. And this is what most influencers like, because they want basically to make an argument that, don't worry, right now, we have grown 100 million times. That is crazy, but we will grow even faster when everybody else joins, right? So we are early and very, they say slowly and then suddenly, right? It's not how Bitcoin works. Absolutely not. How Bitcoin works is like this. Bitcoin growth, it's a power law. It's not an exponential, it's not an S-curve. There is not this S-curve. I don't know where they want it to be there because they wanted to push this narrative, but it's not. Bitcoin doesn't work like that. Bitcoin works like a power law. And a power law doesn't have a characteristic time. It doesn't have this sudden moment. It does the same thing. It does this scaling behavior the same scaling behavior that you see in price. You also see it in adoption. It works where the scale of time and the scale of adoption, how many people join the network, grow proportionally in time in terms of scale. And so there is no one place. You see how almost a perfect straight line. This is how addresses are growing. There is no one place where you say, oh, here there is this place where, all of a sudden the price goes up, right? Or the adoption goes up. There is no. And not because we are early, and so some people say, but it doesn't mean that maybe we are early and we are saying just at the first moment of the growth. No, because if that was the case, we will not see a power law. We will see an exponential. We will see an exponential from the beginning, and it's not true like British Hodl and other people say, oh, many things start like a. I don't know where they took that. No, if something is an exponential, is going to be an exponential. If at least something is an S-curve, you will see the S-curve behavior. We see a power law behavior. And there's been a power law over many order of magnitude. Something doesn't change over many order of magnitude and being a power law, and then it becomes an exponential. No, the reality is there is no an S-curve. I don't know how to repeat it. Show me anybody that mentioned S-curve. Show me the damn S-curve. Show me the evidence for the S-curve. I'm showing evidence that is a power law. I don't know how to explain it to you. It's a power law. There is no such a thing. So actually, the beauty of it is we don't need that. You see, we don't need that sudden moment. All what we need is Bitcoin doing what it has done all this time. It's actually a more beautiful message, more interesting message that all what Bitcoin needs to do to go where it needs to go, that is $10 million, is for Bitcoin to do what has done all this time, and has done it so regularly and in such predictable manner. I don't know why people don't like this message. The only reason is that in their mind, they will want Bitcoin to explode to $5 million in 2 years from now, in 1 year from now, tomorrow. That is the only reason. Otherwise, this will be super popular. Everybody will talk about this all the time. The only reason it's not is that there are some people that don't have it. I don't know why they're even in Bitcoin at that point. Maybe they need time to learn, but it's all about slow preference time. And it's not slow. If we are talking about $10 million in 20 years, there is nothing slow about that.
Right.
And so, and there was telling you before, you will say, why the power law? Because it's a social network, and it's very interesting that people have done work, and this is what I was showing you before, that graph. Let me find it again.
While you're looking for that, Gio, is that the difference? So the technologies, those do grow at an S-curve, but you're saying Bitcoin doesn't, correct?
Correct. Because, yes, Bitcoin is a technology, but even more is a social network. Okay, the technology, it depends on basically the idea is what is dominant, right? Is dominant the fact that is and we can discuss factor in a moment. What is the dominating factor? What is more dominant, the fact that Bitcoin is a social network, or the fact that is a technology? Yes, it's a technology, but it's a secondary principle in comparison. Let me find the graph.
Yeah. So while you're getting there too, the last one on this is it.
Yes.
So what you're what you're saying is the dominating factor is not with Bitcoin is not necessarily the price someone is paying at the margin, a la the scarcity finite thing we've been talking about of, hey, if it all goes into hiding and everyone just goes away and won't sell at any price. And that's where you're saying, well, that's ridiculous. It's more to do with Metcalfe's law and the square root of the users of the network, a social network, versus what someone's willing to pay at the margins. Is that what you're saying? Basically, it's a different, the dominating factor is no, it's the Metcalfe's law. In essence, it's the square root of the users.
Metcalfe, it's actually the square, not the square root, but Metcalfe is only half of a picture. So the picture goes like this. So first of all, it's a fact. If you have a social network, so Bitcoin is more a social network than a technology. Now, for example, the internet, you will think the internet is the technology of all technologies. Well, yes, but in particular is also a network. Now, certain things can be technologies and network at the same time. It's just which one is the most dominant effect. Now, with other technology like a refrigerator, it's not that, people have, they call each other, they come on the main square and say, hey, everybody, did you hear about the refrigerator? Oh, let's buy a refrigerator. You buy a refrigerator, I buy a refrigerator. It's really the coolest things. Let's have a video on YouTube, if YouTube existed at the time, about how cool it is to buy a refrigerator, or how a refrigerator, which people bought it, they heard advertising on TV, or maybe they heard their neighbor having it one. It was not really that strong connections and interactions between people, right? This is how you get a network. Think about Bitcoin. 20,000 people going to a conference in Nashville, right? That is strong network effect. That is a group of fanatic people that want to discuss Bitcoin like we are doing right now, right? How many people discuss these kind of things about NVIDIA? Yeah, okay, maybe you have a video about how good of a stock is NVIDIA, but not conferences where thousands and thousands of people go talk about it. I think about Bitcoin every single day.
You must have missed that refrigerator conference.
Yeah, exactly, right? There is not, right? There is not. And this is why technology, exactly, this is why technology, even with cell phones, can be, can grow in that way, but they don't have that strong interactions that a network has. Social networks do. And here, for example, this study, they show, WeChat. This is what is called the Los Alamos preprint. Is basically a place where scientists, in particular in the physical science, post the paper before they publish, and then they get feedback from other people. Other people reference them, before. So right now, for example, I'm writing this article about Bitcoin where I put all my study. I will put it in this Los Alamos preprint because it takes time, sometimes even a year before the paper gets published, and you show it to other people. You put your stamp on it, right? And it's a digital way of presenting the information, and people can give you feedback before you publish it, etc. It's a network, okay, we have an Enron that I need to explain every time because they say, what are you talking about? Enron was a network. What they did here, they took the emails, right? Because before collapsing Enron, they had it was early during the internet era, they had internal emails and they had access to the emails because of the bankruptcy. And it's a cool example because you can see what happened when the network fails. That many times people ask me, what happens if Bitcoin fails? And so that is actually a useful example. But you see, why we are saying they are network? Because they show here two data. They show the nodes, so they basically the single units, that is the red dot that you see in the chart. Can you see the chart good enough? Yeah. I can make it bigger if you want. Okay, let's
it's even better.
Let's look at. Okay, so they show the red dots that are basically. So this is almost a perfect example. WeChat, right? WeChat is a social network that they use in China. The reason why they are mostly Chinese because the authors were all Chinese plus one professor from the United States. And so this is what they are familiar for them. And you see, this is the typical, when you plot the log of price versus the log of time, right? You get this curve that we are all familiar with Bitcoin, right? A kind of rainbow curve. This is what we get here. These are power laws. These are exactly power laws. If I did a log graph, it would look like a straight line. We also have another graph where we do log, and it looks like a straight line. But in this case, we did a log, what is called a log linear chart. But read the paper, they claim this is a power law, right? A power law for nodes, a power law for links. A power law, this is the change, how the network changes. So how many, remember when I told you for Bitcoin is 3 people times the number of Bitcoiners. So if you want to think about addresses, 3 times the number of addresses divided how old the system is. We found exactly the same behavior, not necessarily 3. They give a slope here, they give all the different slopes. But they found the same type of relationship where the change in the number of nodes is a power law, because usually change means that the derivative, if you know calculus, and if you have a derivative of a power law, you get a power law. And so the change is a power law for the nodes. The links is also changing as a power law. Now, this is the equivalent of a Metcalfe. Basically, is the number of links. E means edges. Edges is another name for links. Links versus nodes. So basically, it's telling you, as you increase the number of nodes, how many more links you have. And it's also a power law. So it's all power laws, right? Now, let's look at what happened with Bitcoin. Do we see the same thing? Now, we don't know. Maybe there are ways of measuring the links. If this is one of the things that eventually I want to do. I want to go deeper in network studies of Bitcoin, but it's quite challenging to get all the information directly, from the blockchain. But we have indirect information. So, for example, we know that links, the value of a network should be proportional to the number of links. Okay, so we can use price as a proxy for the links. If network properties are true, then the value of a network is proportional to the number of links. This is what Metcalfe law says, right? That the number of links is the value of a network. And so I use price as my proxy for links, and I use addresses as my proxy for nodes. Look what happened. Exactly the same curves. Here the red dot, in fact, I did it even with the same symbols. Red dot, red square, little squares, they are the nodes, and this is the number of links. Does it look like this? It looks exactly like that, right? Same thing here. It looks exactly, if you're looking at the change of the nodes. So I try basically to reproduce this graph for Bitcoin. These are the links, these are the nodes. This is the change in the links, these are the change in the nodes. Both power laws. Power law for the links, power law for the nodes, power law for the changes, and the densification. What is called densification is the relationship between the links and the nodes. That is basically another way of saying Metcalfe law. So it's a generalized Metcalfe law. Look at this, a straight line. That is exactly what we have here, a straight line here, right? Straight line here. Same, exactly the same. It's just that for Bitcoin, this relationship is like 1.75. When we did it with WeChat was 1.41. For the Los Alamos preprint, in fact, if anything, we are almost a copy of a Los Alamos preprint. This relationship 1.74 is exactly the same relationship between the nodes and the links in Bitcoin. That is the same slope, right? So it's really cool. It's super cool that actually we can show that. Now, the internet is one thing that I always heard. The S curve of the internet adoption. There is no S curve. It's actually a power law. And I needed to double check and triple check and four check. And this is what you have to do in science all the time. Don't trust anything. You verify. And when I look at it, it's a power law. And in fact, the slope of a power law for the internet is 2.63. And for Bitcoin, the adoption in time is 2.88, almost 3.
Wow.
And so they are very, very similar. You see how parallel they are?
Wow.
Parallel means is basically the same, very, very similar power law. The same way that internet was adopted, Bitcoin is doing it. It's actually, if anything, a little bit faster because bigger this number, faster the adoption is. Just a little bit faster than, but it's really interesting that it's basically the same phenomenon. So when people talk about S curve, they don't know what they're talking about. Bitcoin is this. And the message is more beautiful than the one, because if you are trying to talk about punchline, the punchline that they want to deliver is, right now you're thinking that Bitcoin is growing and it's interesting, etc. Wait until this crazy event. There is always something on the horizon, right? When it will be sudden, and there'll be all of, one day we wake up and everybody decide to run and go and buy Bitcoin, and the price is not going to happen because there is no evidence for that. And it's actually a better message because it says, if we want to go wherever we want to go to hyper-Bitcoinization, that is going to happen in 25 years from now, Bitcoin needs simply to do what it has done so far. It needs to continue on this path. It needs to do whatever it's doing right now, and it will reach there. It's almost unavoidable. So instead of waiting for a mythical time where everybody is joining, just let Bitcoin do whatever is done so far. That is the message. But I think it's a much more realistic and positive message than everything else and people say all the time. And I don't know why they say it. It's wrong. I don't know how else to tell. It's something that I'm arguing with people all the time online and say, which S curve are you talking about? Can you show me?
Yeah.
And nobody can do it because there is no.
It's easy and simple, right? Like that's the answer why, right? It's like it's easy and simple for people to say, and that's why they do it. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you your price predictions for what you see, looking at the laws and studying them so much. What is your, I guess your base case? I mean, what are you, again, this is a guide and a framework. So what do you see, this next year, maybe the cycle? What are you kind of eyeing?
So I actually have an indicator among the many indicators that I have. That it looks like this, where I'm showing in this indicator, I'm showing all the different, I don't know why this line is there, let's take it away. I'm showing all the different cycles, the cycles from all the different, all the previous cycles. Okay. And it's really cool because basically what you're seeing here, I'm superimposing the 3 cycles that we had so far. And every time I go down by, basically I'm going back in time by 4 years. See, here is where we are right now. This is where we were 4 years ago. This is where we were 8 years ago. So it's a way of representing my picture. It's almost like a map of what Bitcoin does, or at least has done so far. What it has done so far is that the overall path is the power law, right? In fact, even during the bubbles, you see how I connected this dot here, right? We leave a power law, we reach a peak, then we go down, and usually we take 1 year to go up, 1 year to go down, and then look what happens. We go back to the power law, basically. So if the bubble, the total result of the bubble is like nothing happened. We just stay on the power law. And this is why the power law is so powerful, because it even explains that it's almost like the bubble didn't exist. The total result, when you go up and then go down, is like if we were moving. It will have been exactly the same if we simply moved along the power law. But, the bubble are there, and they are exciting. It's a different discussion of what you want to do about that, and you want to lock some of your gains. That is one of the things that, again, I have an argument with people about it, because I'm kind of a contrarian. I think that actually if we do have bubbles, maybe you do want to lock some of your gains during the bubble, but it's a separate discussion. But the idea is that there is a very precise pattern even there, right? We have this behavior along the power law that is 2 years where we move like in a very narrow region between the support and the middle power law. Then we have 1 year where we go exponential up, 1 year exponential down, but the total result is still like the power law. And so we can identify all the cycles and tell if a cycle continues and they repeat in the same way, what happened at every particular time. Now, unfortunately, when I compare it, I was kind of excited in the beginning because I thought, all right, the bull usually starts like quarter 4 of this of the end of these 2 years that we are moving along with power law. And we did move along with power law. And then I said in November, I actually anticipated this was, people gave me credit for that, to tell that in November the bull run started. And in fact, it started. We went from 50,000 all the way to 90, right? And if you look, see, this is the same thing, but now I'm subtracting the general trend, right? So you see oscillations around the trend. And I also normalize them by volatility, because the first bubble were enormous. We were like 15 times away from the trend. Then we went down to 10. Then we went down to 5. So if you normalize by volatility, then it looks like actually they are comparable. Because so this is why most of the changes in the peaks, how big the peaks were, can be explained by a change in volatility. And so then you can compare them, and you can see, right, there was the trend that I explained where we go up during the bull, and we go down during the bear, and then we stay kind of flat. That means basically we are following the power law, because remember, we are subtracting the power law. And when I compare the two cycles, the current cycle and the previous one, they kind of look almost identical for some time, right? Look at this. And then kind of in the middle of December 10, we deviated. We went down. The last cycle we ripped. We were ripping through. Look at this, what we did. Now, the cycle before that, also we ripped when we had a major correction. So now the first cycle, so this is cycle number 3 and cycle number 2. For some reason, I didn't plot cycle number 1 here, but you can see where it is here. It took until January 14 to actually start it to go up. So it's possible that we started early, like the previous cycle, so cycle number 3, then we kind of cooled down, and maybe we are waiting mid-January to start to go up, right? If we follow the previous path, because I'm trying always to look at what Bitcoin did in the past, because Bitcoin has been so regular, almost like a clock. So I'm a little worried that, we started well, but we are not doing so well. It's not worrisome in terms of the power law, because if anything, we are actually hugging the power law. It's working. Yeah. This is the only time when I do not want to actually stick to the power law. I want to do better, right? Because this is exactly what it does during the bull run. I like the bull run. The previous calculation that they did, it is not a guess. It's all based on math. It's based on the math of the decay of the peaks. Even that follows a precise mathematical pattern. So if you take it at face value, how fast these peaks decay, and you do the math, it turns out to be 200K. And so this was my projection. It's not feelings. I don't do anything by feelings or by guess. I calculate. And that was my calculation. But that is based on
time frame there.
Event is usually happening. Everything happens at quarter four of this year. Of this year. Probably you're still thinking we are 2024.
I know, I'm still thinking 24.
We are in 25. So this year, at the end of this year, at quarter 4 of this year, we should reach 200,000. Then we go down again. This is under the premise that everything repeats like before. If everything repeats as before, we should go down to 75K after the peak. And it takes about 1 year to go back. So quarter 26 will be 75 again. So that is how I see it. This is the only thing I can do, because instead of making guesses and feelings, I'm trying to use math. And the only way math works is that think repeats like before. And that is the big if, right? I have much less doubt about the overall power law because I think there is some more fundamentals about the power law. The cycles are not an integral part of the power law. It's like an additional analysis, right, that you do because you say, in one end, is like if a bubble didn't exist because we leave a power law, then we go back to the power law. It's almost scary how precise it is. But in the end, there are, and if we want to understand them, then, the only way to make sense of that mathematically is to compare with what happened before. So right now, I'm not yet worried. Yesterday I was doing a silly example. I said, imagine you have a child that is not developing as fast as they should, right? And the first year doesn't talk, the second year doesn't talk. Einstein didn't talk, I think, until 2 or 3 years, and then he became a genius. Because some children take time, right? But by the year 3, he doesn't talk. Maybe you want to go to the pediatrician and say, what is wrong with my child, right? So I'm not yet there where I'm worried about, we are not going to have a cycle, but I'm starting to wonder what is happening. And there is one thing that I mention all the time that I see different from the other cycle, that is liquidity. So if you look at liquidity, so I made this model that is the purple line. So basically, I look at I don't know if you are familiar with liquidity, but basically, is is a measure of how much money is moving around and where, right? So you can take the money.
M2, is that what you're
using?
M1,
M2. Like I'm using different Federal Reserve information. So basically, almost every micro. A micro information that you can imagine, all these quantities. Okay. And so I'm looking at all these things. Now, there is one problem with these, that is I'm not giving values that are proportional to their impact, because you can actually, there are mathematical ways of looking at what is the relative weight of each single component. I have not done that yet. I want to, but right now I'm summing all these things together. And then I look at the relationship with Bitcoin. It's not a simple relationship. It's a relatively complicated model. And when you make complicated model, you have to take it with a grain of salt. This is why my power law is so beautiful, because it's the simplest possible model that you can imagine. You have a straight line. How simplest than that can it be? No, this is why it's so powerful, because it's simple. There is a little to argue with that. With something more complicated, you don't know if you're adding noise, if you're adding components that should not be there. So take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, it's supposed to represent the relationship between liquidity and price. So basically, kind of like the fair value of Bitcoin if was only based on liquidity, right? So right now, that fair value is 33,000. So it's much, much lower than the actual value. And what happens in the past, when you do models like this, right, you always try to see if there is any meaningful pattern. One meaningful pattern I found before was every single time we had a bull run, the purple line was above the white one. And the white one is the price, just pure price, right? The closing price. And so the purple line here, see, the bull started, it was above, right? Previous bubble, the bull started, it was above. So my interpretation of that, in fact, the top of the bubble was the opposite, was when the price became crazy, right? It went almost vertical. Oh, look at this. Right. This was a 13, right? It was absurd. It went like almost vertical. And then the liquidity didn't follow, because, liquidity is much more slower than that, right? This is mostly FOMO. So it was almost a way of identifying the top, saying when the price disconnects with reality, then this is when the bubble is probably is going to burst, right? And so I was very happy about this indicator. For okay, this is cool. You give us and then also for some time, because I do this market reports every week. I was telling my viewer, we were analyzing this. They say, look, it seems like there is a correction. The price reached the power law. Mostly, all this was FOMO due to ETFs. The price was pushed up by people getting excited by the ETF. It had a correction. We went from 70,000 to 50K, and it was continuing to correct like this while liquidity was going up. This is why I have these lines, because I thought, oh, kind of cool. They will kind of meet. I actually liked the idea that there was even a bigger correction, because usually the bull run is like a spring. More you compress the price, more it will come up faster. Yeah. And so I thought, okay, the prices will correct. The liquidity is going up. We will have a scenario that is similar to that, right? Where the purple line is above the white line. But all of a sudden, more or less when we were supposed to meet, they actually went into different directions. So this is why I put a big question mark, because I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to interpret it, right? It's not super bullish not to have a liquidity following the price. Why we don't have a liquidity, right? And my worry is we still had some bullish behavior, mostly because of Sailor, ETFs. But the big question, and again, this is why it's a big question mark, because, as a scientist, certain things I know and understand, and I'm trying to use math and physics, etc., to get an idea about them. Others, you don't know, right? This is part of doing science. Many times you don't know what is going on, and you are trying to figure it out. So I have a big question mark there. I don't know. What does it mean? It could be three things. It could mean, one is a bad thing, because we do need the liquidity to have actually a bull market. Now, it's possible that we continue along the power law without the liquidity. We don't need the liquidity for the power law. That could be one thing. The second thing could be that the liquidity is coming. It's just late. Maybe it's going to wait for the inauguration. Whatever is going to come, and we are going to be fine. And the third possibility is that we don't need it, and maybe it's lower than expected, but ETFs and Sailor alone will be able to push these things and go to whatever, hopefully 200,000. It's going to look bad for people that are thinking 500,000, a million, because I already doubted that ETFs and Sailor by themselves can bring this to 200. I am less worried about following the power law. I think the power law will be there. Now, it's possible even, maybe this is a fourth scenario, where everybody's expecting a bull, like I was saying with the example of a child. Inauguration comes, maybe there is a little push, but nothing special. Then, the end of the month arrives, February arrives, March arrives, and maybe let's say we continue along the power law. And many people take that. It is still amazing, because by next year, for example, by power law alone, we should be 130, 135, something like that, if we follow the power law by the end of the next year. But maybe many people will consider that too bearish, and then they start to sell, and then we have a bigger correction. So I don't know. This is where I put a huge big question mark. I don't know what is going on. That if anything, when people say, "Oh, this time is different," if anything that is different is really this, and it's not bullish. It doesn't look super bullish. It looks a little bit bearish. But I don't know what is it. I don't know what interpretation.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the chart is bearish. Like you said, the liquidity is down, and it's not showing great signs. And I think that's where you for the viewer, it makes it very easy to see why people come to you and say, well, hey, what about this finite asset? What about this scarce thing, right? And like, if there's none left, then the price just goes parabolic. So like we're at this is the crux of that argument in a way. And I know a lot of people are banking on, hey, things are going to ease, liquidity is coming. To your point, I think you nailed the three outcomes, like you said, those are it, like what's going to happen. And I think a lot of people are banking on the liquidity, which, in the macro, obviously is needed. The system needs more liquidity. We just don't know when, like you said, we don't know when that's going to happen. The system to survive needs more liquidity pumped into it. We just don't know when that's going to happen. Right. So that's, I thought it would have come a year or two ago.
Yeah. One observation is that historically, we never went down, or at least not too much, that support line with the liquidity. Again, I don't know if it is a coincidence or something that is meaningful, but look at this. We never went too below, right? So it's possible that we touch that yellow line and then we bounce, right? Yeah. But let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Every time I thought it was like a little turn around, I thought, okay, maybe it's turning around, but it didn't happen, But right now, like I say, maybe it's nothing, maybe it's serious stuff, so I don't know what to make of this, right? Yeah. It's just I'm reporting it as it is.
That is wild. Last one, really, before we wrap with the final thing. What do you like in terms of Sailor, MicroStrategy, what's going on there? Is that, is the power law, is that applicable to stocks? It's a different beast, right? So is there a MicroStrategy power law? Like, is that, I don't know if you've looked into that at all and have thought about it, or how does that work?
Yeah, there is a power law. In fact,
of course there is.
Of course there is. So we don't have a lot of data, and when with the power laws, you have to be a little bit careful. You need to have several orders of magnitude, and we don't have that between MicroStrategy and Bitcoin. But when I did look at it, it looks like a power law. In fact, it looks a nice power law. Like you plot the price of MicroStrategy and the price of Bitcoin, and in a log graph, it looks like a straight line. It doesn't apply to stocks and other things like that, but MicroStrategy follows Bitcoin. And so what you're seeing here, the blue is the price of MicroStrategy. The red line is the model where I'm saying, okay, given there is this power law, it's basically a power law with a power of 1.3, because that power tells you how the system works, right? How the two things are related. In this case, is 1.3. So it means about 30% leverage relatively to Bitcoin. And that, of course, is valid since 2020, because you see here I'm trying to model all the way to when Bitcoin was created. But, of course, they were not doing the same thing. The model doesn't work because they were not yet adopting Bitcoin, right? But then in August 2020, when they adopted Bitcoin, notice how the model and the blue line that is a real price, they follow each other, right? In fact, you could have used it as a way to identify times where MicroStrategy was overvalued relatively to Bitcoin and vice versa, right? You could have said, it's here is undervalued. Let me buy it because, the MicroStrategy should be. In fact, you see, it's interesting when during a bull run, MicroStrategy does better. During a bear market, MicroStrategy does worse, than what the model suggests. That is interesting. And this has been true for all this time until recently, right? Basically around March of the last year, where MicroStrategy started to go away from the model. First, right, with a jump of event, kind of following the same pattern. And then it started to have this crazy exponential behavior, because every time you see a straight line in a log linear chart, right, where we take the log of the y-axis and keep the x-axis linear, that is an exponential. If you see a straight line, it's an exponential. It is almost perfect exponential here. And already at that time, I would say, whoa, MicroStrategy is becoming an exponential. And you know what I think about exponential. Exponential are bad because they are too fast, right? It's not the good growth, sustained growth of a power law. And then I saw even something crazier, that the exponential became even faster, because you see it's even steeper slope. So it became even crazier. And at that time, when I was doing my show, I was saying, guys, something needs to give. When you have crazy exponential like that, we will see a correction.
And I was right. It was a correction. There was a correction, and now we're going back to kind of following what the model says. We are there, so we are overvalued, but in terms of changes, it kind of follows the model. We went back. So, but in general, and I think this is mostly people treating MicroStrategy like if it was a shit coin, but it's not, right? So what they are doing is justified, is a great service, because basically they are creating a chance for institution to use Bitcoin with leverage and doing all kind of different, financial activities based around Bitcoin, that we will not be able to do it if they had to play with Bitcoin itself, right? Because many institutions still want, the security of dealing with a stock versus just Bitcoin, etc. So MicroStrategy service to the financial community is valuable. I think there is no Ponzi scheme, etc. The only thing is when people push it too much and they go crazy. And the system still corrects itself. So it's not that they are going to break it, they're going to create some problem. It's mostly, the people that bought MicroStrategies there, eventually we will go back, but if you use too much leverage on something that is already leveraged, right, because say it's a natural leverage of 1.3, you can get in trouble. So I think it's good. I own MicroStrategy. It's just I will not do too crazy things like, there was a point where everybody was so bullish that, we had, again, some of these young people had these shows where there is even a group called Irresponsibly Long, right? And I get it, it's a meme, etc. But,
right,
don't invest using memes, be careful, So this is what I will say about MicroStrategy.
Incredible stuff, Gio. My goodness, we've been going for almost 3 hours. What are you? Where can people find you? And what else are you working on here that we didn't somehow talk about today? What are the things you kind of have on tap? And where can people find you at?
So they can find me on X, and maybe you can put my X account in the comments. I have a website where you can go. In fact, you can find, if you're interested in the indicators, we have a Discord group with about 1,000 people that are all interested in the power law. We discuss about the power law, but we have many channels and people discuss about options. It's very cool community if you want to join. And the way to join, you go to my it's called Bit Poseidon. And again, I can give you the link, but you go to that, and there is a page that talks about the indicators, and then there is a way, it's basically to a Patreon program. I have a Patreon program that people can join, and then you get a link to the Discord channel, and you can learn how to use the indicators. So now we have like 11 of them. I have also a YouTube channel where we have, for example, I have my weekly market report. In fact, today at 5:15 Pacific time, usually I do my market report where I use the indicator, I talk about the market. And so you can go to my YouTube channel. We have also a series. Right now, I think there are 5 or 6 videos that my son made. These are high production videos, with animations and all kind of things like that, where we talk about this concept of the power law. Basically, we are telling a story. It's called the Physics of Bitcoin series. And eventually, I will write a book. But yeah, these are the places. So I'm going to give you a link for the main website, for my X, and for the YouTube. So if you don't mind to put them in the comments, is where people can find me. In the comments or in the description. Yeah.
Doc, yes. It's been great. Thank you so much, Giovanni, for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. We appreciate you so much. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you to be patient with this long explanation, but hopefully we learn something.
If you like this episode about Bitcoin, macro, geopolitics, and where things are going in the world, then you're going to love the one we just recorded here last week, and you're going to love the one we just recorded here the week prior with other macro experts and Bitcoin experts. They're going to blow your mind. Go check those out. Come on. I'll see you in there.